The knock came at 1:43 in the morning, hard enough to rattle the glass in my front door. At first, I thought it was the wind. The November storm had been slamming rain against the house for an hour, and the old porch light kept flickering like it was trying to give up. My husband Noah was already halfway out of bed when the pounding came again, 3 sharp hits, then 2 more, desperate this time. "Claire," he said, voice still rough with sleep, "somebody's out there." I was already in the hallway, pulling my robe tighter around me. Our daughter Ava cracked her bedroom door open, eyes wide. "Mom?" "Stay in your room," I said, though my stomach had already started to twist in a way I hadn't felt in years. I don't know why I knew before I even looked. Maybe some part of you always recognizes the people who broke you, even in the dark. When I opened the door, rain blew in cold across my bare feet. My mother stood on the porch with her hair plastered to her cheeks, holding the handle of an old brown suitcase with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Behind her stood Rick, my stepfather, smaller than I remembered, shoulders bent, one hand pressed to his chest. And beside him, soaked through and staring at me with a look I couldn't quite read, was my younger brother Dean. My family. The same family who had told me, on the week I turned 18, that if I was old enough to argue, I was old enough to leave. For a second, none of us spoke. 20 years of silence stood there with us in the rain. Then my mother looked at me the way drowning people look at shore and said, "Claire, please. We don't have anywhere else to go." And just like that, I was 18 again, standing on another porch with a trash bag full of clothes, hearing the deadbolt click behind me. The only difference was this time, my hand was on the inside of the door. If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. There are moments in life that split you in two. Not the dramatic movie moments people talk about, not the kind that come with music and speeches. I'm talking about the quiet, ugly moments that teach you exactly where you stand in someone else's life. Mine happened 3 days after high school graduation. Up until then, I had spent most of my childhood trying to be easy to love. My father died when I was 11. Heart attack. One minute he was in the driveway teaching me how to back a bike out without wobbling, and the next he was a framed picture on top of the piano and a casserole train at our front door. He'd been the warm center of our house, funny, steady, the kind of dad who packed notes in lunch boxes and remembered little things. After he was gone, the whole place changed temperature. My mother, Janine, didn't turn cruel overnight. That would almost have been easier to understand. She turned tired. Hard. She moved through the house like she was carrying something too heavy to put down. I learned how to keep quiet, how to clear my own plate, how to help without being asked. Then Rick came along when I was 14. He was practical, organized, good with money, good with roofs and drains and things my mother said my father had never been able to fix. He smiled more in public than at home. He called me kiddo in front of people and dramatic when no one was around. At first I thought maybe he just didn't know how to talk to teenage girls. Then I figured out the truth, he knew exactly how to make me feel like a guest in my own home. Dean was my brother by blood, 2 years younger than me, and from the day he was born my mother loved him with a softness I used to stand in doorways and watch. Some of that came from fear, I think. After losing one man she loved, she held on harder to the boy who looked like him. Dean had my father's eyes. My father's grin. And he learned young that being loved and being accountable were not the same thing. If Dean forgot homework, I should have reminded him. If Dean got suspended, he was acting out. If Dean lied, he needed understanding. If I got upset, I was too sensitive. By 16, I was cooking dinner 3 nights a week, working weekends at a diner called Marcy's, and hiding tip money in an old cookie tin at the back of my closet. I wanted out, but not in some reckless teenage way. I wanted a plan. I wanted stability. I wanted the kind of life where a shut door didn't mean you might end up sleeping in your car. My grandmother Evelyn, my dad's mother, was the only adult who ever looked at me and saw all of it. The quiet. The effort. The fear. She wore lipstick even to the grocery store, had a laugh like a car engine trying to start, and never once let me leave her house without feeding me. She used to tap the side of my head and say, "You've got more grit than this whole family put together." A month before she died, she told me she had put aside money for my schooling. Not enough to make life easy, she said, but enough to make it possible. That sentence carried me for a year. Possible. I worked harder because of that word. Took extra shifts. Filled out college applications at the public library because our printer at home mysteriously never had ink when I needed it. My guidance counselor helped me apply to a state school and to the community college in case money got tight. I wasn't expecting some dream life. I was just trying to build a runway long enough to take off. Then 3 days after graduation, I found the bank statement. I wasn't snooping. Rick had asked me to bring in the mail, and one envelope had already been opened. I saw my grandmother's name on the return address from the trust office and froze right there at the kitchen counter. The account balance didn't say a few thousand left. It said 0. Withdrawn in full. 2 months earlier. I remember the exact sound the kitchen clock made while I stared at that paper. A cheap ticking sound, like it was counting down to something. When my mother came in, I held the statement up so hard it shook in my hand. "What is this?" She looked at it once and then at me. Not guilty. Not surprised. Just tired. "Claire. What is this?" I asked again. "Grandma's money." The money she left for school. Rick walked in from the garage wiping his hands on a rag. One look at my face, and his own got flat and cold. "We used it," he said. Used it. Like it had been extra flour in the pantry. My ears started ringing. For what? Nobody answered. I looked at my mother. For what? Her voice dropped. Dean got into trouble. Dean had crashed a friend's truck while drunk. Nobody had told me the full story because it would only upset you. The money had gone to legal fees, repairs, and getting ahead of the situation. I can still hear myself laughing, and it didn't sound like me at all. "You stole my college money because Dean got drunk and wrapped a truck around a mailbox?" "Watch your tone," Rick said. My tone? My mother reached for me, but I stepped back. "Grandma left that for me." "We are one family," Rick snapped. "That money helped this family." "No," I said. "It helped Dean." Dean came down the hallway right then, drawn by raised voices. 16 years old, still smelling like body spray and gasoline, still carrying the confidence of someone who'd never really had to pay for what he broke. He looked from me to the statement and said, "It's not like you were going to Harvard." I wish I could say that's when something in my mother shifted. That she finally saw me. That she heard the contempt in his voice and the panic in mine. But grief can make cowards out of people, and habit can keep them that way for years. Instead she said, "Everybody calm down." That was the moment I understood that I was alone in that kitchen. I said I needed them to fix it. I said I'd worked too hard. I said Grandma had trusted them. Rick stepped closer. "You live under this roof, eat our food, use our electricity, and now you want to stand there and accuse us? You've had a chip on your shoulder for years." "I have a chip on my shoulder because nobody in this house ever has consequences but me." His face changed then. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. "If you're so unhappy," he said, "you're 18. Move out." My mother whispered, "Rick." "No," he said, still looking at me. "Maybe it's time. She wants to act grown, let her be grown." I looked at my mother and waited. That was the longest wait of my life. She didn't tell him no. She didn't say, "This is still your home." She didn't say, "We'll work this out." She pressed her lips together, looked at the floor, and said, "Maybe some space would be good." There it was. Not a shove. Not a scream. Just a sentence so soft it almost sounded reasonable. Maybe some space would be good. I packed in 45 minutes. Clothes in trash bags. My diner shoes. A framed picture of my dad. The acceptance letters I'd hidden in a dresser drawer. The cookie tin with my tips. When I went back for the blanket my grandmother had made me, Dean was lying on the couch watching TV. He didn't even look up. I slept in my car that first night behind the diner, too ashamed to tell anyone. I kept the seat reclined and my keys between my fingers because I'd read somewhere that women did that when they were scared. By 4 a.m, I wasn't ashamed anymore. I was furious. At 6, Marcy found me. Marcy Ruiz had owned that diner since before I was born. She was 62, no nonsense, wore orthopedic sneakers and bright red earrings, and had raised 3 sons by herself. She knocked on my fogged-up window, took one look at my face, and said, "Get out of that car before your back files a lawsuit." I told her I was fine. She snorted. That's how stupid people answer. I started crying so hard I had to grip the steering wheel. She didn't say I told you so. Didn't say you can't stay there. Didn't make me explain before I was ready. She took me inside, sat me in a booth, poured coffee I didn't even drink, and waited. When I finally told her, she got very still. Then she said, "You can sleep in the stockroom for a few days." Cot's not fancy, but it beats hypothermia. A few days turned into 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned into an apartment over a hardware store that Marcy's cousin rented to me cheap because Marcy personally threatened to haunt him if he overcharged me. That first year on my own was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than giving birth. Harder than building a business. Harder than opening my front door to my mother 20 years later. I worked mornings at the diner and evenings at the grocery store until I found a bookkeeping certificate program at the community college. I learned how far peanut butter can stretch. I learned how to keep the apartment cold to save on heat. I learned that loneliness has a sound, usually the hum of a refrigerator in a room where nobody is coming home. I also learned that survival can feel embarrassingly unglamorous. There were no inspiring montages. Just sore feet. Second-hand textbooks. Panic when my car wouldn't start. Pride so sharp it hurt the first time I paid my own electric bill. I mailed birthday cards to my mother and Dean for 2 years. Nobody answered. At Christmas, I'd sit in my apartment and tell myself I preferred the quiet. That was a lie, of course. But some lies are just pain wearing a coat. The second year, I met Noah. He was 24, taking night classes because he'd changed careers after realizing he hated sales. He wanted to teach English. He looked like the kind of guy my younger self wouldn't have trusted, easy smile, strong voice, the sort of person who seemed at home everywhere. But he kept showing up to class with coffee for the whole study group and the same battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird under his arm, and one night when the copier jammed and I nearly lost it, he fixed it and said, "You always look like you're bracing for impact." I stared at him. What does that even mean? It means, he said carefully, you act like something bad is about to happen every time you exhale. Nobody had ever said anything that accurate to me before. We became friends first. Real friends. The kind where silence didn't feel like a test. I told him about my family in pieces, one cracked tile at a time. He never rushed me. Never tried to rescue me with speeches. He'd just say things like, "That shouldn't have happened to you," in a tone that made me believe it. That mattered more than he knew. By 28, I had my associate degree, a steady office job, and enough experience to start taking bookkeeping clients on the side. By 32, I had my own small business. By 35, Noah and I bought the house I had once thought only belonged to other people, the kind with a deep front porch, a maple tree in the yard, and a kitchen big enough to hold laughter without breaking it. Ava was 13 when she asked me one night why I flinched whenever the doorbell rang after dark. I told her, because once upon a time I got used to bad news arriving unannounced. She thought about that and then said, "That's sad, Mom." Kids have a way of cutting straight to the bone. Maybe that's why, when my mother stood on my porch in the rain 20 years after telling me space would be good, I didn't slam the door. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But Ava was upstairs, listening. Noah was behind me. And no matter how badly I'd been hurt, I knew exactly how a closed door sounded from the outside. So I stepped back and said, "Come in. One night. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Dean brushed past me first, carrying 2 duffel bags that looked too expensive for a man with nowhere to sleep. Rick came in next, wheezing faintly, smelling like wet wool and stale cigarettes. My mother entered last, stopping just inside the doorway like the house itself had accused her of something. Noah got towels. I got blankets. Nobody thanked me at first, which told me more than any explanation would have. We settled them in the den and the downstairs guest room. Ava stood in the hallway pretending not to stare. "This is your grandma," she whispered to me later. I looked at the closed guest room door. "Yes." Ava frowned. "She never visits." "No," I said. "She doesn't. Kids can smell tension the way dogs smell storms." By breakfast, the whole house felt loaded. My mother moved around my kitchen like she remembered where everything should be, even though she'd never set foot in that house before. Rick sat at the table reading the local paper with the entitlement of a man who had once treated every room he entered like it owed him a chair. Dean scrolled his phone and asked Noah if we had any real coffee. I almost laughed. Noah, to his eternal credit, said, "There's a grocery store down the road." My mother shot Dean a warning look. "Be grateful." He held up his hands. "I'm just saying." That phrase. "I'm just saying." Dean had hidden behind it his whole life. After Ava left for school and Noah headed to work, I sat across from the 3 people who had once watched me pack my life into garbage bags. "What happened?" I asked. My mother folded and unfolded a paper napkin. Rick cleared his throat. Dean kept staring at his phone until I said his name. Turns out the short version was ugly and the long version was worse. Rick had retired early after some health issues. Dean had started a roofing company 2 years earlier. There were supply problems, bad contracts, tax issues, and money missing that nobody could fully explain. Rick had taken out a second mortgage to help keep things afloat. Dean had promised one big job would turn everything around. It didn't. The bank came. Then the utilities got shut off. Then the motel they'd been staying in told them they had to leave after 5 nights because Dean had gotten into an argument with management. They had called my mother's sister first. No room. Rick's cousin next. No answer. Dean's ex-girlfriend laughed and hung up, which I privately considered understandable. Eventually my mother got my address from an old church friend who had seen one of my business postcards on a bulletin board. She said all this with her eyes fixed on the table. When she finished, I waited. "That's it?" I asked. "You lose your home and then you show up at mine after 20 years? Dean finally looked up. "What did you want us to do, send an engraved invitation?" My chair scraped back so hard it startled even me. "You don't get to be rude in my house." He leaned back, smirking the way he used to when we were teenagers and he knew someone else would protect him. "Right. Your house. We all know." Rick spoke then. "Nobody came here looking for a fight." "No," I said. "You came here because you ran out of places to go." My mother flinched. Good. I needed at least one person at that table to feel the truth of what they had done. I told them they could stay for 1 week. 7 days. After that, they needed a plan. They would not ask Ava for anything. They would not touch papers in my office. They would not borrow my car. They would not turn my house into some argument-filled holding tank while they figured out whose fault life was. Rick's jaw tightened at my tone. Dean muttered, "Unbelievable." I looked straight at him. "You want unbelievable?" Try being 18 with nowhere to sleep because your family spent your future and called it unity. My mother said my name softly, like that would smooth over 2 decades. It didn't. The first 2 days were tense but quiet. The third day, the old patterns came back. My mother started making little comments in the kitchen. Not enough to openly fight about. Just tiny cuts, the kind she'd always been best at. You still overcook scrambled eggs. Ava talks back a little, doesn't she? This neighborhood must have gotten very expensive. I answered as briefly as possible. Noah gave me the look that meant breathe. Then Rick started acting like my boundaries were suggestions. He took business calls on speakerphone in the living room while I was trying to meet with clients over Zoom. He smoked by the side gate after I'd told him twice not to smoke on the property. He left muddy boots in the hallway and once asked Ava to fetch him water because she was already up. Ava looked at me, waiting. I said, he can get it himself. Rick never asked her again, but the resentment on his face was familiar enough to make my skin cold. Dean was worse because Dean had learned how to wrap selfishness in charm. On Friday night, he came into my office while I was reconciling payroll for a landscaping client and leaned against the doorframe like we were siblings in a sitcom instead of strangers sharing blood. So, he said, you do all this from home? Yes. Must be nice. I didn't answer. He picked up a framed picture of Ava at age 6 on the beach. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. He gave a short laugh. I just need a little help getting back on my feet. Nothing crazy. Couple thousand, maybe. I actually stared at him. Are you out of your mind? His expression changed instantly. Soft to hard. Forget it. No, let's not forget it. You lose your parents' house, walk into mine, and within 4 days you're asking me for money? It's a loan. It's an insult. He stepped closer. You think you're better than us because you got lucky. That did it. Lucky? I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward. You think building a life from a diner stockroom was luck? You think working 2 jobs while taking night classes was luck? You think crying in parking lots because I had $12 until payday was luck? His face went red. Here we go. St. Clair. No, I said quietly. Just the one person in this family who learned there's a difference between help and enabling. He looked like he wanted to say something crueler. Instead he smirked, shrugged, and walked out. That night Noah found me in the laundry room folding towels I'd already folded. You don't have to prove anything, he said. I laughed without humor. Apparently I do. To myself, mostly. He leaned against the dryer. I need to ask you something, and I need you not to hear accusation in it. Okay. Are you helping them because you want to, or because some part of you is still trying to win a trial that ended 20 years ago? I stared at a washcloth in my hands. That was Noah. He never raised his voice. He just opened doors in my mind that I had spent years nailing shut. I don't know, I admitted. He nodded. Then figure it out before they do more damage. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, Ava came into the kitchen in tears. At first I thought something had happened at school. Then she held up the little ceramic jar she kept on her dresser, the one where she'd been saving babysitting money for a spring trip with her debate team. It was empty. Every bill gone. You think I'm stupid? She choked out. I had almost $300 in here. The room went dead still. Dean, who had just walked in, looked offended on instinct. Why are you looking at me? I wasn't looking at him. Not yet. Rick said, kids miscount things. Ava's face crumpled. I counted it last night. Noah took the jar from her carefully. Go upstairs for a minute, honey. No, she said, voice shaking. I want to stay. My mother looked sick. Dean crossed his arms. I asked one question. Did anyone go upstairs yesterday? Rick said no too quickly. Dean scoffed. You're seriously doing this over $300? That sentence answered everything. Noah stepped between us because I had already started moving. Did you take my daughter's money? Dean rolled his eyes. I borrowed it. Ava made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. It was the sound of trust breaking in a person too young to know how loud that can be. You stole from a child, I said. Don't be dramatic. I was going to put it back. When? When I had it. Noah's voice went low and dangerous in a way I had only heard once before. Get out. Rick stood up. Now hold on. No, Noah said, turning to him. There is no hold on. He stole from our daughter. My mother whispered, Dean. He threw his hands up. It was $300. Look at this house. You people act like I robbed a bank. I don't remember deciding to speak. The words just came. When I was 18, you took my future and called it family. Today you took my daughter's money and called it borrowing. Do you know what's amazing? Not that you're still the same. It's that part of me hoped you wouldn't be. My mother sat down hard in a chair and covered her mouth. Rick said, we'll repay it. I looked at him. You're leaving tomorrow. That's not enough time, my mother said, panic breaking through at last. It's more time than I got. Ava ran upstairs crying. Noah went after her. Dean swore under his breath and slammed the back door on his way outside. Rick stood there glaring at me like I was the one destroying the family. Then my mother said something I never expected to hear. This is my fault. We both looked at her. Her hands were shaking. Not just this. All of it. I should tell you that when someone who failed you finally starts to tell the truth, it doesn't feel like healing at first. It feels insulting. Because now, suddenly, they have access to honesty? Now? I was too angry to care. You think? She nodded once, tears slipping down her face. Yes. And there's something you don't know. I almost laughed. Of course there was. She stood up slowly and went to the guest room. When she came back, she was carrying a dented blue metal box I had never seen before. She set it on the kitchen table between us like evidence. I should have given this to you years ago. Inside were old envelopes tied with a ribbon gone brown at the edges. My name was on most of them in my grandmother's handwriting. My fingers went numb. I picked one up. Unopened. Then another. And another. At the bottom of the box was a larger envelope from the state university I had dreamed of attending. Also unopened. My voice came out thin. What is this? My mother was crying openly now. After your grandmother died, more letters came. Information about her estate. Papers from the school. I hid them. The room tilted. Why? She looked toward the door Dean had slammed. Because Rick said if you left for college, Dean would spiral. He said we couldn't afford to lose you too. He said family had to stay together, and you were the strong one, and I let him make me believe your life could wait. I stared at her like I'd never seen her before. Wait. She nodded helplessly. I told myself it was temporary. That we'd fix things. That maybe community college later would be fine. That you'd understand. You hid my acceptance letter. Yes. You hid Grandma's letters. Yes. You watched me believe I wasn't good enough to get out, when I had already gotten in. She closed her eyes. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come sharp. It comes slow, like floodwater. It fills every room in you at once. All those years I had carried the idea that maybe I just hadn't quite made it. Maybe I hadn't been chosen. Maybe life had narrowed on its own. No. It had been narrowed for me. I sat down because my knees wouldn't hold. My mother took one shaky step toward me. Claire, I was wrong. I was weak, and I was wrong. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the box across the room. I wanted my grandmother back, my father back, my 18-year-old self back. Instead, I said the truest thing I had. You didn't just fail to protect me. You helped bury me. She folded in on herself at that. No defense. No excuses. For the first time in my life, my mother stood in the full light of what she had done. And somehow that made everything worse. That afternoon I took a walk in the cold because staying in the house felt impossible. Noah found me 3 blocks away sitting on a park bench staring at nothing. He sat beside me and waited. I handed him the acceptance letter. He read it, jaw tightening. They kept this from you? I nodded. He stared out at the empty playground. I don't even know what to say. Neither do I. After a while he asked, "What do you want?" That question used to terrify me. People like me get trained early to focus on what everyone else needs because wanting anything for yourself feels dangerous. But at 38, on a metal bench in a park that smelled faintly like wet leaves, I made myself answer honestly. I want them out of my house, I said. And I want to stop feeling guilty about it. He reached for my hand. Then that's where we start. When we got back, Dean was on the porch smoking with Rick. I told them both they had until the next evening to leave. Dean laughed like I was bluffing. And go where? I don't know. You'd really put your own mother out? My mother put me out. Rick stepped forward, chin lifted. You've been waiting 20 years for this. He thought he was accusing me. He was actually clarifying things. No, I said. For 20 years I've been waiting for one of you to act like what happened mattered. My mother came to the doorway behind them, eyes red, hands clasped so tightly they looked painful. Rick, stop. He turned on her. Stop what? She's humiliating us. You humiliated yourself, she said, and even I looked up at that. Dean scoffed. Oh, here we go. Now I'm the villain. You stole from Ava, my mother snapped. He looked genuinely stunned to hear her say it out loud. That should tell you everything. He dropped the cigarette and ground it out with his heel. I said I'd pay it back. With what? I asked. He didn't answer. That evening, while Noah drove Ava to her debate practice so she could get a few hours away from the house, my mother asked if we could talk alone. Every instinct in me said no. But exhaustion said yes. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where she had unloaded 20 years of buried damage in under 3 minutes. Up close, she looked older than her 63 years. Not just lined. Worn down. Like life had kept sanding at her and she had never learned how to stop offering up soft parts. I used to tell myself you were strong enough to survive anything, she said quietly. I made that your burden because it made my choices easier. I said nothing. I thought if I kept peace in the house, eventually everyone would be okay. But peace built on fear isn't peace. It's surrender. Still I said nothing. She wiped her eyes. Do you know why I came here myself instead of just sending Dean and Rick? Because I knew if I didn't walk up to this door, I'd spend the rest of my life hiding from what I did to you. I wanted to believe that. I also wanted to remind her that desperation makes people spiritual real fast. Maybe she saw that on my face. You don't owe me forgiveness, she said. I'm not even asking for it right now. But I need you to know something else. When you left, I used to drive by Marcy's diner some mornings before work. Just to see if your car was there. That hit me harder than I expected. Why didn't you stop? She let out a broken little laugh. Because I was a coward. Because every day I waited, it got harder to admit what I'd done. Because Rick would say you needed to learn, and Dean needed me more, and I kept choosing the path that demanded the least courage. I stared at the wood grain on the table. The truth was ugly, but it was at least honest. And honesty, after years of gaslighting yourself, can feel like oxygen. Then she said something that shifted the room. Dean and Rick wanted more from you than a place to stay. My head came up. What? She swallowed. They were going to ask you to co-sign on a small rental house. Dean said he just needed one clean break. Rick said with your income and credit, it would be easy. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Of course. I told them not to. I told them you'd never agree. But that was part of why they came. There it was. The final rotten floorboard giving way. Not just refuge. Access. Not just reconciliation. Leverage. I should have been surprised. Instead, I felt something almost calmer than anger. Clarity. Thank you for telling me, I said. She nodded, tears slipping again. I'm trying, Claire. I know it's late. It is late. I know. The next morning, things detonated. I was in my office on a video call when Noah texted me from upstairs, come now. I muted myself, apologized to my client, and ran up the stairs. Dean was in the hallway outside Ava's room with one of my business folders in his hand. Ava stood by her bedroom door, pale and furious. What is that? I asked. Dean looked caught for exactly half a second before arrogance took over. Relax. I took the folder from him. It contained client bank information, payroll records, tax IDs, the kind of material that could ruin me professionally if mishandled. Why were you in my office? He shrugged. I was looking for a pen. With a confidential payroll folder? Rick came up behind us. Everybody needs to calm down. Noah's expression had gone flat, which was how I knew he was truly angry. Ava saw him taking pictures. I turned to my daughter. Pictures? She held up her phone with shaking hands. I heard a drawer open, and when I came out, he had your folder and his phone. I took this. On her screen was Dean, clear as day, standing in my office doorway with papers in one hand and his phone in the other. A photograph of a theft in progress. Dean's face changed. Oh my God, are we really doing this? Yes, I said. We are really doing this. Rick moved between us. It's a misunderstanding. No, Ava said, voice stronger now. It isn't. I looked at Dean. Were you planning to steal from me too? He laughed, but there was panic underneath it now. You're so dramatic. I just needed some account numbers to bridge things until I got paid. Noah went still. Bridge things. Don't act like you don't understand how money works. I understand prison, Noah said. That shut him up. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs then, taking in the scene with one glance. Her shoulders dropped like she had reached the end of whatever lies she had left to stand on. Dean, she said, give me your phone. He stared at her. Excuse me? Give me your phone. Rick cut in. Janine. She turned on him so fast even I stepped back. No. Not this time. I had never heard that tone from my mother before. Not once in my childhood. Not once when I begged to be seen. It came 20 years late, but it came. Dean scoffed. You're taking her side? My mother's face twisted. There are no sides when you steal from people who are helping you. He looked to Rick. Rick looked away. And in that tiny, ugly moment, the family hierarchy I had grown up inside collapsed under its own weight. Dean shoved the phone into my mother's hand. Fine. Everybody wants me to be the bad guy anyway. You did that yourself, Ava said. I almost smiled. I told Rick and Dean to pack immediately. If they were not gone in 1 hour, I would call the police and hand over Ava's photo along with my client's security footage from the office. Dean cursed at me. Rick called me vindictive. My mother said nothing at all while they packed. When Rick came downstairs with his duffel bag, he stopped in front of me. You always were ungrateful. The old me would have spent days unraveling that sentence, wondering if maybe somewhere inside it was a piece of truth. The woman I had become just looked him in the eye and said, "You mistake obedience for gratitude. They're not the same." For the first time in my life, Rick had no comeback. Dean lingered near the door, face flushed, chest rising fast. "You think she's some victim?" he said, jerking his head toward my mother. "She let all of it happen. Don't let this crying act fool you." My mother closed her eyes. He wasn't wrong. That was the brutal thing. Villains aren't always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who keep handing the knife back. "Leave," I said. He did. Rick followed. The front door closed behind them with a solid, final sound that seemed to move through the walls. My mother sat down on the bottom stair and covered her face. I stood there, breathing hard, not sure whether I had just protected my family or detonated it all over again. Noah put a hand on my back. Ava came and stood beside me. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm glad you didn't let them do that to you." I turned and looked at her, at this smart, fierce girl who had just watched 3 generations of damage try to repeat itself in our hallway and fail. That's when I knew the cycle had truly broken. Not when I bought the house. Not when I started the business. Not when I survived. Now. That night, after Ava went to bed, my mother asked if I was throwing her out too. The answer should have been simple. It wasn't. Because here's the truth nobody likes to say out loud: love doesn't disappear just because trust does. Grief doesn't either. I had spent 20 years imagining what I would do if my family ever needed me, and in none of those fantasies had my mother looked small enough to disappear into one of my kitchen chairs. But pain doesn't earn permanent access. That mattered too. So I told her the truth. "I'm not letting you stay here indefinitely. And I'm not pretending one confession fixes what happened." She nodded, tears already forming. "But," I continued, "I will help you find somewhere safe. A senior apartment. A room to rent. I'll pay the deposit if I have to. I'll make calls. I'll help you because I can live with helping. I can't live with becoming what hurt me." She cried then. Quietly. No drama. Just relief mixed with shame. "I don't deserve that," she whispered. "No," I said. "But I deserve to be the kind of person who chooses with a clear mind." For the next 2 weeks, she stayed in the guest room while we figured things out. And those 2 weeks were some of the strangest of my life. Without Rick and Dean there, the house changed immediately. The air was lighter. Ava stopped walking carefully. Noah laughed more. My mother moved gently through the rooms, asking before she touched anything, folding towels without being told, making herself useful in the awkward, old-fashioned way women of her generation often do when apology feels too small. One afternoon I came home from a client meeting to find her at the dining room table helping Ava sort index cards for a history presentation. Ava looked up. "Grandma knows all this weird stuff about the women's suffrage movement." My mother gave a small smile. "Your great-grandmother marched in one rally when she was a teenager. Family legend says she mostly went because she liked a boy, but still." Ava laughed. It hit me then how much ordinary life we had missed. Not holidays and greeting card moments. Just this. A table. Cards. Shared facts. That kind of loss is harder to measure than money. And somehow sadder. One evening, while Noah graded essays in the den and Ava was at a friend's house, my mother and I sat on the porch with mugs of tea and the first real silence that hadn't felt hostile. "I used to tell people you were stubborn," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Used to?" She smiled faintly. "Now I think maybe you were just the only one refusing to live in a lie." I watched a squirrel tear across the fence line. "You could have chosen me." "I know. More than once." "I know. There are some apologies too late to erase damage. But late is still different from never." She told me pieces I'd never known. How Rick slowly took over every financial decision after they married. How he framed her dependence as protection. How Dean learned from him that charm could get him out of almost anything. How every time she wanted to push back, she imagined losing the house, losing Dean, losing stability, and chose silence because silence looked cheaper. It wasn't cheaper, I said. She nodded. No. It was just delayed. That sentence stayed with me. Before she moved out, I drove her to see a small one-bedroom apartment in a senior complex 5 miles from our house. It wasn't glamorous. Beige carpet. Tiny balcony. But it was clean, safe, and hers. She stood in the empty living room and cried so hard the leasing agent pretended to need copies in the office. I paid the deposit. On the drive back, she kept saying she would repay me. You don't have to, I said. I want to. I believed her. Not because money would settle anything, but because accountability had finally become real to her. And real accountability doesn't hide behind tears. It finds a way to contribute. Rick moved in with a cousin in another county. Dean, after a few spectacularly self-pitying voicemails I never returned, ended up arrested 3 months later for check fraud tied to another failed bridge between jobs. When the detective called asking whether I wanted to make a statement about the office incident, I said yes. People hear that and sometimes think it means I'm unforgiving. What it really means is that consequences are not cruelty. That lesson took me half a lifetime to learn. My mother started working part-time at the front desk of a dental office in her apartment building. She joined a church support group. She began writing me letters, actual letters, in blue ink, on lined paper, because some truths are easier for certain people to say when no one is looking at them. Not every letter was perfect. Some wandered. Some circled old excuses before landing on honesty. But they were honest in a way she had never been with me before, and that counted. The first time I visited her apartment alone, she handed me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a letter from my grandmother Evelyn, one I hadn't seen in the blue box because my mother had hidden it separately out of shame. Claire girl, it said in that jagged handwriting I would know anywhere, if anybody ever tries to make you smaller so they can feel bigger, do not help them. Love them if you must, but do not help them. I sat on my mother's couch and laughed through tears. Sounds like her, my mother said softly. Yeah, I whispered. It does. A year later, Ava got into every college she applied to. The day the first acceptance hit her email, she ran through the house screaming. Noah nearly dropped a bowl in the kitchen. I cried before I even realized I was crying. Ava threw her arms around me and said, Mom, I'm leaving, but like, the good kind. We laughed so hard I had to sit down. That night, after the celebrating quieted, I stood in her doorway watching her tape a college pennant above her desk. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. Better than okay. Because I was. Because when I looked at my daughter, I didn't see a girl who needed to make herself useful to earn her place. I saw somebody expected to grow. Expected to leave. Expected to become more fully herself, even if that meant going far from home. That's what love is supposed to do. Not trap. Not shrink. Not recruit sacrifice from the same person over and over until they forget they had choices. A few weeks before Ava left for school, my mother came over for Sunday dinner. She had gained a little weight back. Cut her hair. Started wearing lipstick again, which made my chest ache in a strange way because it reminded me of my grandmother. After dessert, while Noah loaded the dishwasher and Ava argued with him about the proper way to stack bowls, my mother touched my arm and said, "Thank you for not becoming me." I looked at her for a long second. Then I said, "Thank you for finally becoming someone I can know." We are not a movie-ending kind of family. There was no giant reunion. No holiday montage where everybody changed at once. Dean is still Dean, as far as I know. Rick never apologized. Some damage never gets repaired because the people who caused it don't want repair as much as they want access. But access is not love. And blood is not a permission slip. What I got, instead of a perfect ending, was something real. I got a mother who finally told the truth, even when it cost her. I got a daughter who will never mistake manipulation for family duty. I got a husband who taught me that compassion without boundaries is just self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. And I got myself back. Not the 18-year-old girl. She had to survive too much too soon. But the part of me that knew I deserved a future, even when the people closest to me tried to spend it. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's not that revenge feels good. It doesn't, not really. The fantasy of slamming the door is satisfying for about 5 seconds. Then you still have to live with yourself. The real lesson is harder and better than that. You can be kind without reopening every wound. You can help someone without handing them the knife again. You can forgive parts of a person and still refuse them the right to wreck your peace. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for your children, even for the people who hurt you, is to let consequences arrive and not stand in their way. The night my family showed up in the rain, I thought I was being tested on how much hurt I could absorb without becoming cruel. I was wrong. I was being tested on whether I had finally learned that home is not the place where people are allowed to diminish you. Home is the place where truth can live without fear. 20 years earlier, they told me to move out because I was inconvenient to the life they wanted. 20 years later, they needed a place to stay. What changed everything wasn't that I had a house and they didn't. It was that I had finally built a life where love had rules, respect had a front door, and no one, not even family, got to walk in and rename theft as need. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.